In a small kitchen in Nagano Prefecture, there's a grandmother who has never seen the inside of a bank's debt collection office. Neither have her children. Neither have her grandchildren. 3 generations of financial stability, and the foundation of it all costs less than $3 American. She does not know she possesses a secret. To her, it is simply what one does. Every evening, before the rice cooker completes its cycle, she performs a quiet ritual that her mother taught her, and her mother's mother taught before that. The ritual involves no special equipment, no financial advisor, no complicated spreadsheet, just a small notebook, a pencil worn down to half its length, and 7 minutes of stillness before the family gathers to eat. Meanwhile, in homes across America, the same problem this grandmother solves effortlessly costs families $200 or more each month. Not because Americans are foolish, not because they lack intelligence or discipline, but because somewhere along the journey of Western prosperity, a simple practice was lost, or perhaps it was never learned in the first place. The difference between her $3 solution and the Western $200 problem is not technology. It is not income. It is not even education in the traditional sense. The difference is a habit so small it seems almost irrelevant, passed down through Japanese kitchens for over 400 years. A habit that the great merchant houses of Osaka considered more valuable than their accounting ledgers. A habit that samurai families practiced even when they had almost nothing left to manage. If you have ever sensed that something fundamental is missing from the way America teaches its citizens to handle money, that intuition brought you here for a reason. The year was 1623. In the great merchant city of Osaka, a textile trader named Mitsui Sokubei faced a problem that would be familiar to any modern family. His business was profitable, yet somehow the profits seemed to disappear before they could accumulate into lasting wealth. His household spent money on things that seemed necessary in the moment, but left nothing of substance behind. The pattern repeated month after month, year after year. Sokubei was not a careless man. He kept meticulous records of his business transactions, as all successful Osaka merchants did. But he noticed something troubling. The discipline he applied to his commerce did not extend to his household. There were 2 different systems operating under one roof, one for the warehouse and one for the kitchen. The warehouse grew wealthier. The kitchen remained perpetually anxious about money. This observation would change the trajectory of his family for the next 4 centuries. The Mitsui family would eventually become one of the most powerful merchant dynasties in Japanese history, founding what would later evolve into the Mitsui banking conglomerate. But before the empire, before the banks, before the international influence, there was a grandmother's kitchen and a simple practice. Sokubei's wife, whose name history unfortunately did not preserve with the same care it preserved her husband's, developed what the family would later call Kakeibo. The word itself combines kake, meaning household finances, and bo, meaning ledger or book. But to translate it simply as household ledger misses the depth of what this practice represented. In Edo period Japan, the household was understood as an economic unit no different in principle from a commercial enterprise. The woman who managed the household was not merely keeping track of expenses. She was serving as the chief financial officer of a small but vital institution. The same standards of rigor that applied to a merchant's warehouse applied equally to a family's kitchen. This was not a common understanding in the West during the same period. European households of the 17th century certainly kept records, but the practice was sporadic, inconsistent, and often abandoned when times became difficult. The Japanese approach was different. It was daily. It was ritualistic, and most importantly, it was tied to a philosophical framework that gave the small act of writing down numbers a much larger meaning. The samurai class, despite their warrior reputation, were equally devoted to this practice. A samurai household operated on a fixed stipend from their feudal lord. There was no possibility of earning more money through entrepreneurship, as commerce was considered beneath their station. This constraint forced samurai families to develop extraordinary discipline in managing what they had. The Ogyu family of Edo Retainers to the Tokugawa shogunate kept household records that survive to this day in the National Archives of Japan. What strikes modern researchers is not the complexity of these records, but their consistency. Every day, without exception, someone in the household recorded what was spent and what was consumed. The practice continued through births, deaths, festivals, famines, and even the chaos of political upheaval. When scholars study these records, they find something remarkable. The Ogyu family's spending patterns remained stable for over 200 years. Despite inflation, despite changing social conditions, despite the natural human tendency to expand consumption when possible, this family maintained the same proportional relationship between income and expenditure across 8 generations. The secret was not mathematical. The family had no sophisticated economic training. The secret was habitual. Someone in that household, every single day, sat down in the kitchen before the evening meal and performed the ritual that Mitsui Sokube's wife had developed 2 centuries earlier. The practice spread through Japanese society, not through books or formal education, but through the transmission that happens between mothers and daughters, between mothers-in-law and young brides entering new households. It became so woven into the fabric of domestic life that by the Meiji era, when Japan opened to Western influence, foreign observers noted with surprise how even poor Japanese families maintained detailed records of their household finances. A British diplomat stationed in Yokohama during the 1880s wrote in his personal correspondence that he had never encountered a society where servants and laborers kept better financial records than the English merchant class. He attributed this to what he called the Japanese obsession with order, but he missed the deeper truth. This was not obsession. This was inheritance. 400 years of accumulated habit passed down through kitchen tables and quiet evening rituals. The central practice is called Kakeibo, but to understand why it works, one must look beyond the simple act of record-keeping into the philosophical structure that supports it. Kakeibo is built around 4 questions that must be answered before any purchase is made. The first question is, how much money do I have available? Not how much money do I earn, not how much money is in my bank account, but how much money is actually available for spending after all fixed obligations have been honored. The second question is, how much would I like to save? This question must be answered before spending begins, not after. In Western budgeting, saving is often what remains after spending. In Kakeibo, saving is decided first, and spending fills the space that remains. The third question is, how much am I actually spending? This requires daily recording, not weekly or monthly review. The Japanese understanding is that money consciousness fades rapidly. A purchase made 3 days ago feels almost like it happened to someone else, but a purchase recorded in the quiet moment before dinner remains vivid in the mind. The fourth question is, how can I improve? This is where Kakeibo reveals its connection to the larger Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, the principle of continuous incremental improvement that Western business schools discovered only in the 1980s, when Japanese manufacturing was overwhelming American competition. Kaizen applied to household finance means that perfection is not expected. A family practicing Kakeibo does not begin with a flawless budget and maintain it forever. Instead, the family expects to fail, expects to overspend, expects to make poor decisions. But each failure becomes a teacher. The daily ritual of recording creates an automatic reflection point, where the question, how can I improve, is asked not in frustration, but in genuine curiosity. There is a Japanese proverb that captures this spirit. Nanakorobi ya oki. Fall 7 times, stand up 8. This proverb is often quoted in Western self-help contexts, but its application to household finance is rarely understood. The families who practice Kakeibo do not expect to master their finances quickly. They expect the process to take years. They expect setbacks. They expect to look back on their records from 5 years ago and feel slight embarrassment at the mistakes they made. But they also expect to see improvement. And because they have written records, they can actually measure that improvement. A family that has practiced Kakeibo for a decade has a decade of data. They can see the patterns, they can see the seasons when spending increases and the seasons when discipline strengthens. They can see the impact of life events, the birth of a child, the illness of a parent, the excitement of a promotion. This visibility creates something that Western financial planning often lacks: forgiveness through understanding. When an American family overspends in December, they often experience it as a moral failure. When a Japanese family practicing Kakeibo overspends in December, they see it as a pattern that is repeated for years and can be planned for next year. The same failure becomes a different emotional experience. The physical act of writing is also essential. Kakeibo was developed long before calculators or computers, and traditional practitioners still insist that the practice be done by hand, with pencil on paper. Modern research in cognitive psychology has confirmed what these families understood intuitively. The act of physically writing engages different memory processes than typing on a keyboard or viewing numbers on a screen. When you write down that you spent $12 on something unnecessary, your hand forms the characters. Your eyes watch the characters appear. The number exists not as an abstraction, but as a physical mark you created. This sensory engagement makes the information more emotionally real and more likely to influence future behavior. The timing of the practice is equally important. Kakeibo is traditionally performed in the kitchen before the evening meal, when the day's activities have concluded, but the body has not yet entered the relaxed state that follows eating. This timing creates a natural boundary. The recording becomes a transition ritual that separates the spending of the day from the restoration of the evening. A Japanese woman, born in 1920, who practiced Kakeibo from the day she married until the day she died, would have performed this ritual approximately 25,000 times. 25,000 moments of financial consciousness, each one reinforcing the habits of the one before. The compound effect of this consistency is difficult for the Western mind to fully grasp, but its results are visible in the financial stability of families who have never earned exceptional incomes yet have never experienced debt. The principle that emerges from Kakeibo is not about restriction, it is about awareness. The Japanese understanding is that most financial difficulty comes not from insufficient income, but from unconscious spending. Money leaves the household in small amounts, each one feeling insignificant until the cumulative effect becomes overwhelming. Kakeibo interrupts this process every single day. It forces consciousness upon what would otherwise remain invisible. And it does so not through willpower, which is exhaustible, but through habit, which is renewable. The question naturally arises: if this practice is so effective, and if it costs almost nothing to implement, why did it not spread to the West along with so many other Japanese innovations? The answer lies in a fundamental difference in how Japanese and Western cultures understand the relationship between daily life and financial wisdom. In the West, particularly in America, financial knowledge has been professionalized. The assumption embedded in American culture is that managing money requires specialized expertise that ordinary people cannot reasonably be expected to possess. If you want to manage your finances well, you hire a financial advisor. If you want to budget properly, you purchase software designed by experts. If you want to get out of debt, you enroll in a program created by professionals. This professionalization has created an enormous industry. The personal finance market in America generates hundreds of billions of dollars annually through books, courses, coaching, software subscriptions, and advisory fees. The existence of this industry depends on a foundational belief that financial management is too complex for kitchen tables and pencil notebooks. Kakeibo offers no such complexity. It requires no certification to teach and no fee to learn. It can be transmitted from mother to daughter in an afternoon. It requires no ongoing subscription and no annual renewal. It is, in the language of modern business, radically unmonetizable. The Japanese family that practices Kakeibo has no need for budgeting apps. The grandmother in Nagano with her $3 notebook has achieved what the $200 per month software subscription promises, but rarely delivers. There is another factor, perhaps more significant. The Western relationship with consumption is fundamentally different from the Japanese relationship. American economic philosophy, particularly since the mid-20th century, has been built around consumption as the engine of prosperity. The good citizen, in this framework, is the citizen who spends. Consumer confidence is tracked as an indicator of national economic health. Tax policies are designed to encourage spending. The entire advertising industry exists to stimulate desire for things that were not previously wanted. Within this cultural environment, the daily practice of asking, "How can I reduce my spending?" runs directly against the prevailing current. An American who practices Kakeibo is not simply adopting a personal finance technique. That person is implicitly rejecting a fundamental assumption of the economic system they live within. This creates psychological friction that does not exist for the Japanese practitioner. When a Japanese mother teaches her daughter Kakeibo, she is transmitting an uncontroversial cultural inheritance. When an American father tries to teach his son the same principles, he is swimming against a tide of cultural messaging that says, spending is good, restraint is deprivation, and the goal of financial life is to be able to afford more things. The Japanese concept of motenai is relevant here. Motenai expresses a sense of regret over waste, a feeling that to discard something useful or to spend money unnecessarily is a kind of spiritual error. This concept has no direct equivalent in American English because the feeling it describes is not cultivated in American culture. An American who throws away half a meal may feel mild guilt about food waste. A Japanese person raised with motenai feels something deeper, a disturbance in their relationship with the material world. This emotional difference makes frugality feel natural to one and effortful to the other. The transmission of Kakeibo also requires a specific family structure that is weakened in Western societies. The practice passes from mother-in-law to daughter-in-law, from grandmother to granddaughter, through the physical proximity of extended family living. When Japanese families lived in multi-generational homes, the evening ritual of Kakeibo was witnessed and absorbed by young women before they ever managed their own households. American families dispersed. Young couples established independent homes far from their parents. The physical proximity that allowed wordless transmission of financial habits disappeared. Even families that wanted to pass down these practices had no natural mechanism to do so. This is not a criticism of American family structure. It is simply an observation that cultural practices require cultural infrastructure. The infrastructure that sustained Kakeibo in Japan does not exist in the same form in America. This explains why the practice remained unknown in the West, even as Japanese cars, electronics, and management techniques were eagerly imported. Understanding why something did not transfer is not the same as accepting that it cannot transfer. The American who wishes to implement Kakeibo faces real obstacles, but none of them are insurmountable. The first step is acquiring the physical materials. You need a notebook small enough to keep in the kitchen, a pencil rather than a pen, because pencils invite revision and pens suggest permanence, and a quiet place where you can spend 7 to 10 minutes without interruption before the evening meal. The notebook should be simple. Many Americans are tempted to purchase specialized Kakeibo journals that have been designed with elegant layouts and instructional text. These can be useful, but they are not necessary, and they can become a form of procrastination. The grandmother in Nagano uses a notebook that costs 200 yen. The power of the practice is not in the equipment. The daily ritual has a specific structure. You begin by writing the date. Then you record every expenditure from the previous 24 hours, no matter how small. A coffee purchased becomes a line item. A parking meter becomes a line item. The temptation will be to skip the trivial purchases. This temptation must be resisted because the trivial purchases are precisely where unconscious spending hides. After recording, you calculate the total spent. Then, you compare this total to what you intended to spend. The gap between intention and reality is your teacher. You do not need to judge the gap. You simply need to see it. At the end of each week, you review the daily entries and ask the fourth question: how can I improve? Perhaps you notice that you spent money on convenience when you were tired. Perhaps you notice that certain days of the week are more expensive than others. Perhaps you notice that spending increases when you are emotionally unsettled. These patterns are invisible to someone who does not keep daily records. They become obvious to someone who does. At the end of each month, you conduct a more thorough review. The monthly review is when you set your savings goal for the following month. Remember the Japanese sequence: decide how much to save before you decide how much to spend. This reversal of the Western order is perhaps the single most important structural change. You do not need to change everything else about your financial life. You do not need to cancel subscriptions or sell possessions or move to a smaller house. You simply need to add this one practice: 7 minutes each evening, a notebook that costs less than a cup of coffee, and the willingness to see what you have not been seeing. The results will not appear in the first week. They may not appear in the first month. Kakeibo is not a quick fix. It is a slow cure. The Japanese families who have practiced this for generations understand that financial wisdom accumulates like compound interest, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. If you implement this practice for 1 year, you will have 365 records of your daily spending. You will know yourself financially better than 99% of Americans know themselves. You will have identified patterns that no financial advisor could have told you, because no financial advisor lives inside your daily life. And you will have spent less than $3 on the notebook that made it all possible. There is a reason you found this teaching. Among the millions who scroll past without pausing, something in you recognized that this was different. Something in you has always suspected that the Western approach to money was missing an element that other cultures understood. That suspicion was not foolishness. That suspicion was the beginning of wisdom. The great merchant families of Osaka did not have access to any information that you cannot access. They did not possess superior genetics or special blessings. They possessed a practice, a simple, daily, quiet practice that they maintained with consistency across generations. You do not need to become Japanese to inherit this wisdom. You do not need to move to another country or learn another language. You need only to begin: a notebook, a pencil, 7 minutes before dinner, and the commitment to continue even when life becomes difficult, especially when life becomes difficult. The grandmother in Nagano does not know that she is wealthy by any absolute standard. Her house is modest, her car is old, her possessions are few, but she has never lain awake at night worried about money. Neither have her children, neither will her grandchildren. Wealth is not always what you have. Sometimes wealth is what you never lose. You already understood that something was missing. Now you know what it is. The distance between understanding and living is 7 minutes each evening, a small notebook, and the patience to let the practice do its work. In the next teaching, we will examine a principle that the samurai class considered even more important than Kakeibo, a principle about the relationship between honor and debt that disappeared entirely from Western financial thinking. It explains why certain families never borrow, even when borrowing would seem to make perfect sense. But that is for another evening. For now, perhaps find a notebook, perhaps find a pencil, and perhaps, before tomorrow's dinner, begin.